President Arthur Sterling publicly questioned Marcus Thorne's intelligence, and the comedian didn't just clap back, he completely shut the president down. But what happened next stunned everyone even more. It was an ordinary day in the world of politics, or so it seemed. President Arthur Sterling was sitting down for an interview, one of those sessions where he talked bluntly, said exactly what he thought, and often stirred reactions wherever he went. He had a reputation for speaking his mind, sometimes to the delight of his supporters, sometimes to the confusion of the public. But today felt different. There was an edge in his voice, a sharpness that made people lean closer to hear what he would say next. Sterling began as usual, talking about leadership, the state of the country, and his vision for the future. His words were forceful, delivered with the confidence of someone used to commanding attention. But then, unexpectedly, his focus shifted. He paused for a moment, looked directly at the camera, and mentioned a name that made some people blink in surprise. Marcus Thorne. Marcus Thorne, the comedian, television host, and longtime voice of humor and advice, was not in the room. He wasn't being interviewed, and there was no ongoing debate involving him. Yet Sterling decided in that moment to speak about him, and the words that came next were sharp. He questioned Marcus Thorne's intelligence, implying that he wasn't among the smartest voices in the public sphere. The comment was quick, cutting, and precise, the kind of remark that made people stop mid-breath. The reaction was immediate. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. There was an awkward silence, the kind that happens when everyone realizes something unexpected and tense has just occurred. People weren't sure what to think. Some were shocked, some curious, and others simply bewildered. It wasn't every day that a sitting president publicly criticized a popular comedian in such a blunt way. To understand why this was so striking, it helps to know who Marcus Thorne really is. He isn't just a funny man on television. He spent decades building a career that spans comedy, radio, talk shows, and motivational speaking. Millions of people know him not just because he can make them laugh, but because he talks about life in ways that feel relatable. He has advised people on relationships, work, personal growth, and the kind of everyday challenges most of us face. He has shared lessons that go beyond jokes, lessons about resilience, understanding others, and navigating life with honesty and humor. So when Sterling questioned his intelligence, it wasn't just a small jab. It felt like a challenge to Thorne's entire life's work for people watching. It was confusing. How could someone so accomplished, who had entertained and guided millions of people, suddenly be called out as not smart? It seemed unfair, almost shocking, because Marcus Thorne's intelligence wasn't measured by academic achievements or political debates. His intelligence was measured by experience, empathy, and the ability to communicate with people in a way that made sense to them. The tension in the room was palpable. Viewers were caught between disbelief and anticipation. What would Thorne do if he were here? Would he get defensive, angry, or offended? Would he try to argue back, or would he laugh it off? The uncertainty made the moment even more gripping. Everyone watching understood that this wasn't just about a joke. This was a test of composure, wit, and personal strength. Sterling, as usual, seemed confident. He had thrown out his statement like a gauntlet, and he appeared to expect a reaction that might challenge Thorne or cause a stir. But even he might not have predicted what would happen next. The question lingered in the air. Could a comedian, someone known for laughter and entertainment, actually turn the situation around and demonstrate a type of intelligence that was deeper, quieter, and just as powerful as any political knowledge? This was more than a moment of tension. It was a setup for something memorable. The sharpness of Sterling's words had captured attention, but the story wasn't over. In fact, the attack on Marcus Thorne's intelligence set the stage for a response that would not just answer the insult, but also reshape how people thought about intelligence itself. It was a clash between blunt authority and life-earned wisdom, and the audience was about to witness it. What started as a heated interview had transformed into a moment of suspense. Sterling had thrown the first punch, but the room, the viewers, and perhaps even the president himself were about to discover that not all punches land the way they are intended. The air seemed heavier with anticipation. Everyone in that moment was waiting. A question hung in the room. How would Marcus Thorne respond? The moment of silence that followed President Arthur Sterling's sharp words hung heavy in the air. Everyone watching could almost feel the tension pressing down. People wondered if Marcus Thorne, the man who had spent decades making others laugh and giving advice, would respond with anger. Would he fight back? Would he stumble over his words under the weight of a direct challenge from the president? But then Marcus Thorne spoke, and it was nothing like anyone expected. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to insult back. He didn't even look upset. Instead, he used a tone that was calm but confident, the kind of tone that immediately made people pay attention. And in those few words, he changed everything. He reminded everyone that intelligence isn't one simple thing. It doesn't just come from politics, business, or formal education. Intelligence can also be about understanding people, knowing how the world works, and using life experience to make smart decisions. Marcus Thorne began by pointing out that his life had given him skills and knowledge that were often overlooked. He spoke about hosting shows for millions of people, talking to everyday families about their struggles, and giving advice on relationships, money, and personal growth. He reminded the audience in a clever and funny way that dealing with the real-life problems of countless individuals requires a type of intelligence that isn't measured by tests or public debates. He cracked a joke about how managing a live show, keeping audiences engaged, and solving tricky situations on the spot could teach lessons that even some politicians might envy. The room couldn't help but laugh, but the laughter was mixed with a realization. Marcus Thorne wasn't just joking. He was making a serious point about what intelligence really means. His words carried weight because they were rooted in experience. Thorne had spent decades talking to people from all walks of life. He had learned how to listen, how to understand, and how to respond in ways that made a difference. That, he explained, is a form of intelligence too. He didn't need to prove himself with fancy words or complex ideas. His life had already proven it. The impact was immediate. People who had been tense, unsure, or anxious began to relax. Laughter filled the room, but it was more than laughter. It was recognition. Thorne's clever response had flipped the situation. What started as an attack now became a lesson. The audience realized that intelligence comes in many forms. And Marcus Thorne had just demonstrated one of the most powerful kinds: emotional intelligence, experience, and the ability to communicate with clarity. Even President Arthur Sterling, who had expected a different kind of reaction, appeared momentarily unsettled. He tried to brush it off, making quick comments and adjusting his expression, but the effect was clear. Thorne had the upper hand. The sharp words meant to undermine him had bounced right back, not with aggression, but with confidence and insight. The audience saw a man who had faced millions of challenges in life, who had built a career on helping others, and who wasn't going to let an insult define him. The moment also carried an unspoken message. Intelligence isn't about looking smarter than someone else or proving a point in public. It's about understanding the situation, staying calm, and responding in a way that shows clarity and wisdom. Marcus Thorne's reply reminded everyone that strength often comes in quiet, confident ways. A sharp comeback, a clever remark, or a calm explanation can be far more powerful than anger or aggression. People left with a lasting impression. It wasn't just that Marcus Thorne had defended himself. It was that he had done it in a way that taught something meaningful. He had shown that life experience, empathy, and the ability to communicate effectively are just as important as any other kind of intelligence. And in that moment, he wasn't just a comedian or a TV host. He was a teacher demonstrating lessons that anyone could apply to their own life. The room seemed to settle after Thorne's words. Laughter and recognition had replaced tension. The audience understood that Sterling's attack had failed, not because it wasn't bold, but because Thorne had responded with a type of intelligence that couldn't be shaken by insults. He had turned a moment of potential conflict into a display of wisdom and composure, showing that being smart isn't always about being the loudest or the most aggressive. It's about knowing yourself, understanding others, and responding with confidence. In the end, what started as a tense confrontation ended as a defining moment. Marcus Thorne had done more than respond to an insult. He had taught an unforgettable lesson about intelligence, resilience, and the power of a thoughtful reply. And in doing so, he had shut down the attack completely, leaving the audience and even Sterling with no words left to counter. The exchange between President Arthur Sterling and Marcus Thorne had left the room buzzing. But what really mattered was what came after. Marcus Thorne didn't just respond with humor or a clever joke. He demonstrated something far more important: the power of respect, composure, and understanding what true intelligence really means. Many people think that being smart is only about knowing facts, winning arguments, or being able to speak convincingly in public. In politics, especially, intelligence is often measured by how quickly someone can make a point or dominate a conversation. But Marcus Thorne showed that intelligence is much broader than that. It includes empathy, patience, experience, and the ability to navigate complicated situations with calm confidence. Thorne's response had been measured, thoughtful, and strategic. He didn't try to humiliate Sterling or argue about politics. Instead, he reminded everyone that being intelligent is also about understanding people and life itself. Over decades of working in television, comedy, and public speaking, Thorne had faced countless challenges. He had handled interviews, difficult guests, live mistakes, and public scrutiny. All of these experiences had sharpened his mind in ways that weren't obvious to the casual observer. By responding the way he did, Thorne turned what could have been a tense and embarrassing moment into a demonstration of quiet strength. He proved that intelligence isn't always loud or confrontational. Sometimes it is calm, clever, and measured. He also showed that responding to criticism doesn't have to mean attacking someone back. Respecting yourself while calmly addressing criticism is a skill in itself, one that many people overlook. For viewers and listeners, this moment was eye-opening. It wasn't just about a public figure defending himself. It was a lesson in how to handle conflict in everyday life. Too often when someone insults or challenges us, the instinct is to react immediately, sometimes harshly, or with anger. Marcus Thorne reminded people that taking a moment, thinking clearly, and responding with insight and composure often leaves a far stronger impression than any quick retort. Insult could. The situation also highlighted the difference between knowledge and wisdom. President Arthur Sterling's attack focused on knowledge in a narrow sense: political understanding, public perception, or the ability to debate facts. Marcus Thorne, on the other hand, represented wisdom born from life experience. He had learned to understand people, to see situations from multiple perspectives, and to communicate effectively with diverse audiences. That type of intelligence doesn't always show up in debates or interviews, but it can be far more powerful in real life. Moreover, Thorne's response reminded people that respect is contagious. By not retaliating aggressively, he commanded respect from the audience, from viewers, and even to some extent from Sterling himself. The lesson was clear: you can defend yourself without diminishing others. You can prove your intelligence without needing to humiliate anyone else. This is a principle that applies not just in public exchanges, but in workplaces, schools, and personal relationships. Another subtle lesson in Thorne's response was about humility and self-awareness. He didn't claim to be the smartest person alive, nor did he exaggerate his accomplishments. Instead, he acknowledged his strengths in a natural, authentic way, using humor and perspective to communicate his point. People responded because it felt genuine, not forced. Authenticity, Thorne showed, is itself a form of intelligence. It allows people to connect with others in ways that formal knowledge alone cannot. The moment also challenged a common misconception that public recognition equals intelligence. Sterling's comment assumed that because Thorne was primarily known for entertainment, he lacked serious intelligence. Thorne turned that assumption on its head. He proved that intelligence cannot be judged solely by one's profession or public persona. It can show up in life skills, emotional understanding, and the ability to guide and influence others positively. By the end of the interaction, the audience understood a simple but powerful truth. True intelligence is as much about character and respect as it is about knowledge. It's about how you handle challenges, criticism, and conflict. It's about staying calm under pressure and thinking before responding. And perhaps most importantly, it's about showing others that even in the face of attacks, dignity and clarity can speak louder than any insult. Marcus Thorne had not just defended himself. He had provided a lesson for anyone watching, whether they were a public figure, a professional, or someone facing daily challenges in life. He had shown that responding with respect, clarity, and thoughtfulness is a form of intelligence that cannot be shaken by brash words or impulsive attacks. It was a moment that stayed with people, a reminder that true strength often comes quietly but leaves a lasting impact. Just when the tension from Marcus Thorne's clever response had begun to settle, something happened that no one could have predicted. The room, the viewers, and even the president himself were about to be hit with a revelation that would eclipse the earlier confrontation. A report leaked, one that immediately grabbed everyone's attention. It was a supposed DNA test, and the results it revealed were nothing short of astonishing. According to the document, Leo Sterling, the youngest son of President Sterling, was not just Sterling's son, he was also his grandson. The report suggested that Leo's biological parents were Arthur Sterling and his daughter Elena, not Serena. For a moment, disbelief took over. People read the claim again and again, wondering if it could possibly be true. The idea seemed impossible, but the leak made it public in a way that couldn't be ignored. Questions began to swirl instantly. How long had this secret been kept? Was it real, or was it some kind of hoax? What did this mean for the family, for the president, and for everyone involved? Even outside the immediate circle of viewers, the story spread through conversations and news. People couldn't stop talking about it. Friends, colleagues, and family speculated on what could have led to such a revelation and how it had stayed hidden for so long. In households across the country, the news created shock and disbelief. It was the kind of information that made people question everything they thought they knew about one of the most well-known families in the world. Inside the family, the revelation would have been even more devastating. Imagine the shock and confusion of trying to process a claim that redefined family relationships in such a dramatic way. What did it mean for Leo himself? How would the parents, grandparents, and extended family members react? The leak didn't just create public curiosity. It created a personal crisis that threatened to change the very dynamics of the family. The timing made it feel even more dramatic. First, there was the confrontation with Marcus Thorne, a moment of wit, humor, and intelligence. And immediately after, this bombshell appeared, shifting the conversation entirely. What had started as a public debate about intelligence and respect suddenly became a story about family secrets, trust, and the fragility of personal reputations. The two moments, although separate, now seemed connected by a single theme: the unexpected consequences of actions and words. For those observing, it was a lesson in how quickly life can change. In one moment, people were laughing and admiring Marcus Thorne's cleverness. In the next, they were grappling with a revelation that was difficult to comprehend. It reminded everyone that public figures, no matter how powerful, are subject to the same kind of surprises, scandals, and personal challenges as anyone else. Power and influence do not shield anyone from shock, confusion, or the consequences of secrets kept too long. The leak also raised broader questions about honesty and secrecy. Families everywhere, not just public ones, deal with hidden truths, long-held secrets, and information that can dramatically alter relationships. The sudden emergence of Leo's DNA test served as a stark reminder that secrets, no matter how well guarded, have a way of coming to light, often at the worst possible time. It reminded people that transparency, trust, and communication are essential, whether in personal relationships or public life. Even the audience that had been focused on the earlier confrontation could not help but reflect on the contrast between the two events. One was a lesson in intelligence, respect, and composure. The other was a shock that revealed the limits of control and the unpredictability of life. Together, they formed a powerful narrative. Even in positions of authority and fame, nothing can be taken for granted, and one moment can completely change the story. The public, of course, reacted with a mix of disbelief, speculation, and curiosity. Conversations and debates exploded everywhere. People discussed what the revelation meant, whether it could be true, and how it might affect the family moving forward. It was a story that touched not just on scandal, but on human relationships, trust, and the unforeseen consequences of hidden actions. And while many were focused on the scandal itself, there was also an underlying recognition of the fragility of public image. Even someone as powerful as the president could face events beyond his control, events that could reshape the way people see him and his family. In that sense, the leaked DNA test was more than a sensational story. It was a reminder that life, family, and reputation are all intertwined, and that the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how carefully it is hidden. By the end of the day, what started as a sharp attack on a comedian had been completely overshadowed by a revelation that no one could have predicted. The story had shifted from clever responses and witty comebacks to a dramatic question of family, identity, and secrecy. It was a moment that reminded everyone watching that life is unpredictable, full of surprises, and sometimes completely beyond what we think we know. By the time the dust had settled from Marcus Thorne's clever response and the shocking DNA revelation, people were left trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. The events were connected only by timing. Yet together, they told a story far bigger than anyone could have imagined. What began as a heated exchange about intelligence had evolved into a lesson about respect, human character, and the unpredictable nature of life. Marcus Thorne's moment of wit had shown the world a powerful truth. Intelligence is not one-dimensional. It isn't measured solely by degrees, political knowledge, or public recognition. Intelligence can also be emotional, practical, and experiential. Thorne's response reminded people that staying calm under pressure, responding thoughtfully, and using life experience wisely can be far more impressive than a quick insult or a sharp comeback. It was a reminder that knowledge isn't just about what you know. It's about how you handle situations, treat others, and communicate effectively. The president's attack, though meant to belittle, had unintentionally highlighted Thorne's strengths. It revealed that composure, self-awareness, and the ability to respond with humor and insight are forms of intelligence that command respect. Thorne had demonstrated a rare kind of power, the power of grace under pressure. And the lesson wasn't just for public figures, it was something anyone could take into their own life. Handling criticism with dignity, thinking before reacting, and using experience to guide your actions are skills that matter in every situation, from personal conflicts to professional challenges. Then came the unexpected twist of the DNA test. The revelation about Leo Sterling's parentage shifted the story in a completely different direction. It reminded the public that life is unpredictable and that even the most powerful families face challenges and secrets that can suddenly surface. The news about Leo raised questions about trust, relationships, and transparency, showing how complicated family dynamics can be even under the scrutiny of the public eye. It was a stark reminder that secrets, no matter how carefully hidden, often find a way to emerge. Together, these events offered a broader lesson about the human experience. Life is unpredictable, and even those who seem to have control can face moments that upend expectations. Intelligence, power, and confidence are important, but they do not shield anyone from the consequences of hidden truths, sudden revelations, or unexpected events. What people do in these moments, however, can define them more than the events themselves. Marcus Thorne's measured response and the shock of the DNA leak both illustrated how individuals face challenges in very different ways, and how those responses shape perception, respect, and legacy. The combination of these two events also encouraged people to reconsider how they judge others. Sterling's comment about intelligence assumed a narrow definition, but Thorne's reply expanded the understanding of what it means to be smart. Intelligence is not just academic knowledge or political awareness. It includes the ability to navigate life, manage emotions, understand people, and respond effectively in high-pressure situations. It includes the wisdom that comes from experience, empathy, and insight. Thorne had reminded everyone that true intelligence often shows up quietly in ways that aren't always immediately visible, but leave a lasting impression. At the same time, the DNA revelation reminded the public that truth has a way of emerging, whether in families, relationships, or public life. Even those with influence and power cannot control every outcome. It was a moment that forced people to think about transparency, honesty, and the consequences of secrecy. Life has a way of surprising everyone, and the ability to respond with thoughtfulness and integrity is what ultimately matters. In the end, the events surrounding that day created a powerful story. On one hand, there was a lesson in grace, intelligence, and respect. On the other hand, there was a lesson in the unpredictability of life and the importance of honesty and awareness in personal relationships. Together, they painted a vivid picture of how words, actions, and hidden truths intersect to shape reputation, respect, and understanding. For anyone observing, the takeaway was clear. Handle criticism with intelligence and calm. Understand that true strength often lies in grace, not aggression. Recognize that life is full of surprises and secrets eventually come to light. And most importantly, appreciate that intelligence takes many forms, from the lessons learned in daily life to the wisdom gained from experience. By the end of the day, what began as a sharp attack had transformed into a story with multiple layers. Lessons about respect, the depth of intelligence, family, and the unpredictability of life. It reminded everyone watching that life is complex. Challenges come in unexpected forms, and how we respond to them defines who we are far more than the challenges themselves.